Google and all these other tech companies always said, they wanted to be responsible and ethical. And I think that the voice of their employees is quite important, and that accountability and that sort of ability to challenge authority instead of just having the management manage the communication and the dissent, and instead of the companies just sort of preserving themselves and preserving that institution.
Will the notoriously toxic workplace culture of big tech firms ever change? Claire Stapleton is the mastermind behind Google's marketing campaigns, and she's written a new scathing memoir about her experiences working at Google. In it, she reveals she was quietly demoted after coordinating a mass workout by female employees at Google, female employees of Google in 2018, and given the cold shoulder by her female boss after dissent. Claire Stapleton is the author of Don't Be Evil, which comes out on August the 27th, and she's a former Google employee. And she joins me now. Hello, Claire. Welcome to Times Radio. Can you just talk us through your career at Google for those who don't know, and about the walkout you coordinated?
Yeah. I started at Google when I was 21 years old. I came straight out of university. This is 2007, so it's a bit of a time capsule now. The promise of information sort of democratizing and improving society as a whole was still sort of gripping the public. Companies like Google and Facebook was sort of just getting going then, were hiring tons of young people, luring them onto these sort of beautiful, perks-laden campuses in Silicon Valley, but also kind of cropping up in offices around the world. And I had studied English literature, so just sort of like a humanities student, had no interest in technology really at all, but I was sort of drawn in by the story and the mythology of Google at the time. And the brief of the job was basically to help tell the company's story. So I was in Mountain View for a few years, and I immediately was put on a sort of funny, high visibility internal event, which was called TGIF, where I wrote a script for Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of the company, and sort of helped them facilitate this dialogue with employees. And was sort of in the catbird seat for a company that was kind of obsessed with its culture and obsessed with its ability to change the world. It was really what tech was sort of all about then. And I kind of cycled through a few different roles. Disillusionment started to set in a few different ways as I had sort of typical disappointing, tough management experiences. And I spent my last few years at YouTube, which was a really interesting and consequential time for the company. Google had become a sort of holdings company. YouTube was really grappling with its own impact on society, very, very complicated set of content moderation issues, creator issues, what are we trying to do sort of issues, and watching the management sort of bumble through this sort of ultimate consequence on the world was tough. So it was the summer of Me Too. The women of Google, I'm sure, were just primed by the moment to reckon with our own experiences in the workplace. And there was a very dramatic story reported about how Google had agreed to pay $90 million to one of its top executives to have him sort of quietly leave the company after a series of sexual harassment investigations. And so that was the flame that lit this huge fire. And I sort of helped organize this big protest in which 20,000 people, not just women, walked out that day to kind of say, where's the accountability for the sort of, very strange, unequal environment that you've created here, where you're sort of paying someone who's a, abuser, all this money. And and so we were the women who were organizing it. We felt, oh, this is a great moment to push the company towards more change, and the company has always welcomed the values and passion of its employees, and kind of how beautifully naive we were, because sort of systematically they got rid of us one by one, and Google continues unabated.
Well, the point here, Claire, it's not always just Google. That you obviously the title of your book is "Don't Be Evil," and of course, don't do evil. That was the slogan, and I think there is a sense that it's not just Google. There's a lot of the big tech companies that have preached virtuous behavior and trying to do good things, but then the culture is not actually seen in the office. Do you think there needs to be a much wider cultural change across big tech firms, and how do you think that can happen?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that it's what's unique about tech is that it always wrapped its mission and purpose in this very moral language, and they hired a lot of young people on the back of that sort of idealism. And so, of course, even with someone like me, right, the company is kind of foisted by its own rhetoric here, because we have a desire to hold the company to the things it said. It stated over and over and over again. I think that we're sort of seeing an unprecedented concentration of power, corporate power, in these companies. And with AI and everything else, these companies, they sort of guide and manage our inner lives in a way that's sort of the stakes are ever higher. So if Google and all these other tech companies always said they wanted to be responsible and ethical, and I think that the voice of their employees is quite important, and that accountability and that sort of ability to challenge authority instead of just having the management manage the communication and the dissent, and instead of the companies just sort of preserving themselves and preserving that institution. So I hope that with the book that I'm able that, for the many people who've been in toxic work environments in many different ways, every kind of toxic work environment is sort of the same and yet it's unique, but that people can feel that there's risk inherent to challenging authority, but I think it's incredibly healthy to push back, especially when the company that you work for has such a tremendous effect on the society as a whole.
And finally, Claire, I'd like to quickly pick your brains about AI at the moment, because President Donald Trump seemed to have changed his tune when he announced that new AI tools from Google, Microsoft and XI would have to be tested by the US Department of Commerce before they could be released to the public. And I mean, there is this concern that, is AI friendly? Is this a way the tech companies are trying to use this to improve their reputation, to sign they're doing good things, but at the same time, it's kind of being restrained by the US government?
Yeah. I think that the more powerful a system is, the greater its potential impact on society and the greater the public oversight has to be. I mean, I think you need clear rules. The AI is almost not about the technology itself. It's sort of about the fact that tremendous amounts of very personal data are being funneled through just a handful of companies who have so much power and so little relative accountability. So I think that debate, and also just generally the public mistrust of AI, particularly among young people, I think is thrilling and important. I keep hearing that people are booing a Claude ad that runs before the Odyssey. These technologies, any technology isn't inherently anything. It's that the companies and the institutions that govern them might use or hoard or deploy that information for surveillance or all these other things that can be quite dangerous. And there needs to be more of a reckoning and a debate, at any given time.
Well, thank you very much. That was Claire Stapleton, who's a former Google employee turned whistleblower and the author of the new book, Don't Be Evil. We contacted Google for a response to these claims, but they have not yet sent us a response.